Needs
I
more
like the
purple. More purple.
Oh, 31st year purple?
Why not?
Every year purple.
Yeah.
I'm with you, I'm with every year purple, I'm down for that.
Aren't you the boss? Can't you make that decision?
What's that?
Can't you make those decisions?
These decisions, they're made so many years in advance.
Oh.
The purple was probably made in like 2020.
So it's 2030, you're saying purple's
Back when
coming
you were an
back.
intern.
Exactly, yeah, back before. What's up, everyone? Thanks for staying late. I can't believe we used to do the second round after this.
Seems later. That's what we were saying.
Right, it does. I don't know if they were definitely, I felt like it was more than 5 minutes between each pick, right?
Yeah, so why, what about Colin Murray Bowles made you decide he was your man at number 9?
Yeah, I think as a sophomore, we had 2 years to evaluate him. So someone that we identified last year, he decided to stay in school, but sort of had our eye on him going into the season. I think for those of you who watched him, I think, very obvious elite defense, really versatile, great hands, a lot of stocks. So I think for us, it was the defense versatility, but we felt, he has a chance to be a really, really good defender in the NBA.
About your shooting though, is that, you said he's been working on it diligently, but is that a problem for you guys? Not a lot of 3-point shooting?
I think sometimes we forget, Brandon's coming onto this team, and so, you sort of, think about the offensive, defensive, balance of the team. Shooting's at a premium in the NBA. At the same time, I think we saw in the finals sort of Oklahoma City defense, there's something to be said about these type of defenders that, can really disrupt, the other team. And then shooting, something we've always tried to work on here. I think, we've taken a lot of kids with this profile in the past, and, it's a lot of work out there. It's a lot of, testament to these kids' work ethics and sort of our evaluation of how much he can, how willing he is to work. He's not running from it. He knows, obviously, it's something that he wants to work on. So, we'll go there, but we know sort of the baseline on the defensive end and around the rim on offense. I think that's, he is effective around the rim, and he's been, productive on that end as well.
Obviously, with every rookie, there's some degree of patience required, but it does seem like with his body and his skill set that he's a little bit more NBA ready than some of the other bigs in that range. How quickly do you think he can make an impact even at the back end of a rotation at the NBA level?
I mean, it's tough for any rookie. We've been, you've been through enough rookies here. It's hard to be productive as a rookie. I do think the one thing that gets you on the court as a rookie is your defense, and so I think that gives him a leg up. But no, expectations will always be managed as far as, listen, he's not only adjusting to coming to the NBA and playing basketball, it's the lifestyle stuff. It's off the court. There's so many more requirements here. You're not in school anymore. What are you doing with your time? So I think we're always cognizant of the other stuff that they're adjusting to as well. So, we'll have the realistic expectations for him.
Positionally, do you see him obviously he's got the ball to play anywhere really, but do you see him tall enough to be a center, or is he more like a 4, or you'll see how it goes sort of thing?
I think in the defensive end, he can guard all over. So I think that's fine. Yeah, probably what's the natural fit on the offensive end? But I think we'll see it. I think he handles the ball well. He does a lot of things that you see sort of Darko does in his offense, dribble handoff, sort of operate from the top, pass well. So we think he fits sort of on both ends.
On the offensive end there, I know he played a little bit of kind of like point forward at South Carolina. Do you think that's potential for him in the NBA, or do you think he's more like a connector at the pro level?
I think both what you said, right? He grabs and goes sometimes. He kind of plays that elbow, top of the key dribble handoff. So I think, a lot of the stuff you see in our current offense, I think he is suited for on the offensive end as well.
There was a lot of trade rumors and speculation about what you guys may do with the 9th pick, in addition to picking, maybe trading it. What was that actual volume of interest when you guys got to making the pick?
I think a couple of things were at play. I think we were one of the few teams in the top 10 willing to deal it. And so I think that's probably where a lot of the noise came from. And so we had a lot of those discussions because of that. I think some people thought it was sort of a 7-8 player draft. So the draft really started with us. So a lot of teams that were trying to move into the draft, they felt like, right around where we were is where it kind of was unknown. And so if you wanted to move in there and get your guy. But yeah, I think probably the first part, which was just a more active year than normal for us with this pick.
So with Colin in particular, would it be confident for you to yes, there's a lot of interest in this pick, but we see Colin and there's an opportunity here. I guess I'm asking, did you guys have him higher than 9, for example?
Yeah, we had him higher than 9. I think the defensive stuff, versatility, we've seen a lot of players here be successful in that role, and I think that was high on our list.
You guys have talked about needing like a backup center, a young center for a little while now. Is that no longer a need? Is that still something you guys want to address? How does he sort of fit into that equation?
You probably have to talk to Darko. I think, he's played some small ball five, so I think there'll probably be some of that. I think, as we've seen, you can't play that the whole game. I think he probably feels comfortable 4 or 5, maybe some 3 if you've talked to him. But I also think, big picture, we're still in talent acquisition mode. I think we're not so worried about position as we try to find, these players. Obviously, teams change a lot and you can trade, there's a lot of different movement there. So for us, it was just more, who do we think is the best player?
Colin said Toronto was his first workout. Did you sense any nerves from him, and maybe what stood out in the conversations you had with him?
Yeah, I think he was excited. He did his homework. He told us he went to, I think he was with his family, he said, during the holidays in New York. So I think there was a road game, and he said, Scotty's defensive energy is what stood out to him on that team. So he knew a little bit about us. He had watched us play. Obviously talking to his agent, was identified here as a place that he wanted to come. We wanted to come. So we had, I think he said, his first workout here, took him to dinner, really professional, hardworking, has a bit of chip on his shoulder. I think you'll probably get that. He wasn't the most highly recruited kid coming out. I think he transferred, went to a prep school at Wasatch, which is a pretty well-known prep school, then goes to South Carolina, so doesn't sort of follow the typical, path of a top kid. And so I think he's, put in a lot of hard work to get here.
So you weren't spooked by his first word on the broadcast when he was announced?
Sort of you all see it, and then sort of we have to we sit back. My take on it was,
I can't believe you have an answer for this. This is great.
No, it was. We don't tell a lot of teams will tell the players that they're getting picked, and so I don't think he knew. I think maybe I think it was truly like sort of a reaction to it happening, and so maybe we should leak to them more. I don't know. He knew we had. My point is, he knew we had interest. He wanted. I think that was sort of like that was our reaction.
Yeah. You said you're still in talent acquisition phase, and rosters can change. It seems like there's, with the reported trades, I suppose, at this stage, there's been a lot more going on early. Do you still anticipate that level heading into free agency, with all, so much focus being on teams looking to shave money or whatever? Do you still think a lot of trades are coming?
Always, but I do think that the draft is the sort of second, unofficial trade deadline or first unofficial trade deadline, I guess you'd call it, mainly because of the value of these picks. And so many of our conversations are around 9, and so now 9 goes away, and so I'm not sure there's as many talks. There's probably more just typical player for player trades. But no, I think we've had a pretty active offseason to date, for NBA terms. So.
Do you feel pretty good about who might still be there at 39? Or do you have a sense of if you'll make that pick or it might be up for grabs?
I'm pretty sure we'll make it. It's our second year doing this 2-day NBA draft, so I think we're trying to get a sense of, do we sort of re-rank tomorrow? Do we just sort of go according to the board? Is there more information that'll come out? I think last year, we went through it at 31, and so there's just more things tomorrow that's going to come out. Who fell? Why'd they fall? So there's going to be all the sort of gossip. So you have to sort of sift through all of the information. But now I expect us to take 39.
A lot of time, these top prospects come from winning programs, and we look at that and talk about that as a feature, or look how much they won and all that. South Carolina lost a lot last year. Do you take anything from that in terms of informative for you guys in evaluating what kind of a both player and person Colin is, having gone through that and handled it the way that he did?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's our job to sort of see through that. I think a lot of the on-off stuff for him when he was on the court, they're obviously better. So you're trying to find the winning players within, those situations. Most of you probably seen it. He has really, I think, sort of poignant interview where he talks about it, sort of like, I think either they had lost a bunch of games in a row and they finally won one, but you guys can probably find it where he sort of talks about being a winner on a losing team. And I think that sort of perspective stood out to me. Also, SEC is the best, basketball conference in the country, so it's not necessarily a detriment that you weren't great in the SEC.
You do have a team that's very together, the chemistry you've talked about for years. What makes you think he'll fit in personality-wise with your guys?
I think, you just think of that second unit. sort of second half of the year, I think they thrived on defense. I think, they sort of rallied around that. I think that sort of became, one of our, top attributes or identity towards that. And so I think he'll fit in with that, which is who's going to play really hard on defense. Darko made a huge emphasis on that. And so playing together on defense, I think, is sort of infectious. And I think that would be the initial one.
That's the only stuff matter.
Yeah, though, I think, great kid, personable, like all of those things, it's kind of, I think sometimes you think too hard to mush those guys together, whereas I think, you probably saw this year, it wasn't, the personalities fit, not necessarily because we were so, okay, this, Jamal is going to be best friends with Jaco, like they sort of they fit together in their own way. And I think we're not trying to puppet master it too much,
Past 4 or 5 years, you guys have obviously gotten a pretty massive roster overhaul. How do you think Colin will kind of embrace just kind of the chaos of the NBA, the competition, going into summer league, going into training camp and all of that?
Yeah, I think you'll find very quickly, I think he'll take that challenge on. I think in talking to him and getting to know him, sort of his path to here wasn't easy. And sort of the challenge of the NBA feels to me like something that he's been building towards. Even his decision to go back to South Carolina was, I'm not quite ready. I know I need to have work on things. So I think there's a realistic expectation, a realistic perspective of what he can and can't do. But no, I think he's up for the challenge.
Last year, you guys drafted Shed 30 or 45th, and that was a trade that you made. Is that something that you're open to do tomorrow? And was last year's again that like second day you kind of reevaluated where things were?
Yeah, it's a good one. I don't think we went into last year on the second day expecting we'd end up with, I think 45 and 57, right? And so, yeah, I think that opportunity presented itself. Similarly, we'll be ready for that tomorrow. We were ready for that tonight. Is do you move back? Do you move out? But yeah, it's a good point. Tomorrow last year I didn't tell you that on Wednesday night.
How do you see Colin and Scotty fitting offensively together?
I think high IQ, both can handle the ball. I think we always feel like, we say, you can stack IQ. And so I think that feels to me like, they'll play well with each other. You obviously have to worry about the shooting, but I think we have some shooting that you can package with both of those guys. I was thinking of defensive end, you think about maybe front line of Colin and Scotty and Yak, like it's, formidable on the other end as well.
Play those three guys offensively together with their spacing issues?
I think there's probably 2 good enough shooters on the team that you could. But these are Darko questions.
The concept of like best player available or picking that, do you think that's like best player available career-wise, what they're gonna be in their career, or do you look at it more in like a shorter window? And does the modern NBA change the way you look at it because it seems like there are shorter windows with the aprons and all that?
I think sort of Josh's question, it's hard for rookies to be productive. So I think you have to say, okay, who's really, realistically, okay, can, Cooper come in and, so I think that's sort of there. No, I think best player available is you're assuming the guy's going to stay on your team for a long time, so you want him to be great. If he so happens to be productive early, great. But I think it's always much more of a long-term view, which is, in Colin's case, we know he's going to be really good on defense. We know he's really good around the rim. If he turns into a really good shooter, then that sort of changes the trajectory of his career.
Thanks, Bobby.
Thanks, Bobby.